CMI continues its mission to make it convenient for you to get premier outpatient care while deliberately making CMI the safe clinic for you and all those who are dear to you. Premier outpatient care is now available in the tip of your hands. With the same unhurried, meticulous attention, you can consult with CMI's broad range of specialists by phone, by video, or in person. For patients who prefer to see their doctor in the clinic, virtual patient screening for symptoms is mandatory prior confirmation of your appointment. We send online health declaration forms for you to fill out. Once your appointment is confirmed, you are all set to go to CMI. Since companions are not encouraged, patients are dropped off at the main entrance of Ori Central, where CMI is located. Kindly keep your mask on at all times. We want you to be safe in our clinic right from the doorstep. Here are the clinic protocols we have implemented for your protection. Upon entering, your temperature will be checked by our care specialist. As we prepare your suite, you will be seated at our lobby while observing social distancing with other patients. You may get your snacks at our refreshments area, one patient at a time. Disposable cups for hot beverages have replaced reusable cups for the time being. Hand sanitizers and rubbing alcohol are also placed in key areas of the clinic for your easy access. Our doctors, care specialists, and staff are all wearing DOH-compliant personal protective equipment to ensure providing you with premier patient experiences. Your consultation is done in the privacy of a clean and spacious consultation suite. We also ensure to follow new normal processes for your physical therapy sessions and diagnostic procedures. Aside from our dentist and full personal protective equipment, we also use aerosol suction machines and acrylic covers during your dental procedures. If your doctor prescribed medicines, you may veer away from crowded drugstores as we have our pharmacy in the clinic for your convenience. We want you to be safe while in our clinic, even as we stay safe ourselves. All CMI staff undergo regular COVID-19 surveillance using Roche antibody screening. Lastly, CMI was conceptualized and built with your utmost safety in mind. CMI is on negative pressure airflow, and our high-efficiency particulate absorbing HEPA filters are built in. Since day one, we have been using UVC lamps to sanitize the clinic in between patients and after clinic hours. Also, our housekeeping staff regularly cleans and disinfects the consult rooms after each patient's use. In CMI, we are committed to provide the premier care you require and the safety you expect. Visit us at CMI for your outpatient medical needs.
Good afternoon, everyone, and we hope you are well. Centro Medical International, or CMI, is a premier outpatient clinic located in the heart of BGC. With over 150 specialists and subspecialists on our roster, CMI continues to be here for your medical needs, such as specialist consultations by phone, video, or in person, diagnostic procedures, and preventive treatments, such as vaccinations and checkups. No crowds, no queues, no hassle. CMI is the safe clinic for you and all those who are dear to you. CMI is open Mondays to Saturdays, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Visit our website www.cmi.care or visit our Facebook page facebook.com/cmi.care for the latest updates.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Bambina Olivares, your moderator for today, and also Director of Programming for Manila House. As we navigate another surge in the number of COVID-19 cases, it's time we invest in the lessons learned into our pandemic strategy and develop the ability to bounce back. Today, Centre Medical International, in partnership with Manila House, presents an expert-backed roadmap to reset our pandemic response in a webinar entitled Reboot Required: What Has to Change in the Philippine COVID-19 Response? Before we proceed, just a few reminders. We have muted everyone's microphones and turned off your videos for the duration of the webinar. For any questions, please type them in the chat box, which can be found at the right side of your screen. We will group similar questions together and have our speakers cover as much ground as we can. If you have not already done so, it would be great if you could include your full name to help us identify you properly for your questions and for other matters where we might need to reach you. Let's begin by introducing our speakers. Dr. Eileen Espina serves on the Medical Advisory Board of CMI. She specializes in family medicine and received her master's in public health from the University of the Philippines. Dr. Espina serves as a consultant on disaster medicine to several international organizations, including CARE International and the World Health Organization. She is globally recognized as an expert on patient-centered, family-focused, and community-oriented approach to care. She's a member of the steering committee of the Healthcare Professionals Alliance Against COVID-19, or HPAAC. Dr. Michael T. finished his medical degree at the University of the Philippines, Manila, where he was awarded as the most outstanding intern in medicine, surgery, family and community medicine, and otorhinolaryngology. He completed his residency training in internal medicine and finished his fellowship in rheumatology at the UP Philippine General Hospital. And finally, we have Dr. Benjamin Ko, who is a practicing board-certified pediatrician and infectious diseases specialist. He is a graduate of the University of Santo Tomas and completed his residency at the UST Hospital. He completed his fellowship training in molecular and clinical pharmacology at Boston University Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts. He is a former director of the Center for Drug Regulation and Research for the Food and Drug Administration of the Department of Health. He's an OCTA Research Fellow, and in the past year has provided up-to-date, insightful analysis of COVID-19 data through his blog, relativejoyforyou.com. We now give the floor to our first speaker, Dr. Eileen Espina, and she will talk about prevention and management of surges in workplaces and communities. Dr. Espina, over to you.
Good afternoon. Kindly allow me to share screen. Maraming salamat for your presence in this afternoon's webinar. Thank you, Bambina, for that kind introduction. And my task this afternoon is to talk about prevention and management of COVID-19 surges or outbreaks in the workplace and communities. But before I begin my talk, allow me to declare my potential conflicts of interest. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to a dramatic loss of human life worldwide and presents an unprecedented challenge to public health, health systems, and the world of work. In this crisis, public health, along with mental health, employment or labor issues, particularly workers' health and safety, and food security has converged. The economic and social disruption caused by the pandemic is devastating, to say the least, as tens and millions of people are at risk of falling into extreme poverty, while millions of enterprises and businesses face an existential threat. Nearly half of the world's 3.3 billion global workforce are at risk of losing their livelihoods, and millions of households are losing their sanity as well as a result of being locked down for over a year now, with grim prospects at the horizon. Children in particular, who have not been allowed to go out, have been isolated from their peers, which is truly abnormal for a child to live with. This will eventually manifest itself in later years as mental health issues unless properly managed. Our losses have been huge, and the concept of going back to how things were before the pandemic is actually a far-fetched reality. However, if there is one thing that COVID-19 has shown us, it is this. We need to accept that we can no longer go back to business as usual. But we in HVAC are actually afraid that we would emerge from this pandemic no different from when we entered it, with crowding, heavy traffic, pollution, enclosed spaces, and an inadequate healthcare system that was laid bare by COVID-19. We hope that we will take this challenge to accelerate the solutions we wish to see in our future world. And we need to begin with those things that we need to do today. As they say in the Chinese proverb, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And the first step that we all need to do is to reframe the problem. We need to have an alternative approach. The current situation is, the current question has always been, when do we reopen? Para na nga tayong may alphabet soup. ECQ, MECQ, GCQ, MGCQ, enhanced GCQ, GCQ with yung bago ngayon. So, bakit hindi natin itanong, paano ba mag-reopen rather than kung kailan tayo mag-reopen? Kasi when the question is when, it becomes a closed and open approach. Para lang siyang either you close or you open, black or white. And people are either allowed or not to go out. Whereas, if we reframe it and ask ourselves, how do we reopen safely? There will be shades of gray, and it will allow us to change the way we do things and together achieve a better world in a new normal. So this afternoon, hopefully we will be able to answer this question. What has to change in order for us to reboot our country's COVID-19 response? As a public health practitioner, my first answer would be, we need to secure the real front lines. Hindi po hospital ang real front line. Ang totoong frontline po ay ang ating mga bahay, our households, our communities, and our workplaces. Health is in the hands of the people. Tayo po ang solusyon sa problemang ito. Nasa kamay natin ang kaligtasan natin sa kalamidad na ito. We need to protect each other, especially the vulnerable. This is the time for solidarity. We need to understand that the things that we do actually impacts on our neighbors. Never has it been truer yung kantang, no man is an island. All this we need to do in order for us to safely reopen and for our economy to recover. So in line with this narrative, NEDA Planning Secretary Carl Chua proposed a change in approach from risk avoidance to risk management. Baka po kayo nagtatanong bakit may turtle. Because I believe that Carl Chua believes na yung kailangan natin is a gradual relaxation of community quarantine measures. Para pong yung race between the turtle and the hare. I believe what he is saying is for us to take slow but sure steps. Okay? Gradual relaxation of community quarantine measures, making sure that everything that is needed to keep us safe, are already in place before we move on to the next phase of reopening. We need to put in place po yung mga kailangan munang ilagay rather than wishing for things to magically disappear with a snap of a finger just because sinabi ng GCQ na bukas. Hindi po kasi mangyayari yun. Okay, we need to understand what he meant by risk management. What does risk management actually look like? So, ako po, as I am a disaster risk reduction and management practitioner, and I have been tutored by no less than Super Typhoon Yolanda. And because of that experience po sa bagyong yun, I have come to understand that using a risk management approach, okay, would include a deeper understanding of the pandemic curve in relation to the DRRM cycle. Yung DRRM cycle po has 4 steps: prevention and mitigation. So kailangan po nating ayusin ang mga dapat ayusin. We need to mitigate yung ating mga bahay halimbawa. Tayo po ba ay mayroong enough spaces? We need to mitigate our workplaces. We need to prevent po yung magkakaroon tayo ng crowding halimbawa. Then we need to prepare such that pag nagkaroon po tayo ng outbreak, kaya po natin siyang ma-detect agad ng maaga at makat po ang chain of transmission. And then, it is a cycle. So ito po ito po yung kailangan nating gawin. Dapat po natin itong maintindihan because it is only through this manner that we can institutionalize change and build resilient health systems. Ano ba yung resilient health system na sinasabi ko? Ang isang health system po, masasabi nating resilient if there is a capacity for health actors, institutions like hospitals, okay, and the population to prepare for and effectively respond to the crisis, maintain our core function when a crisis hits, and reorganize if conditions require it. Isang taon na po tayo. And I would like to honestly ask you, are we really effectively responding to the crisis? Are we able to maintain our core functions every time nagkakaroon tayo ng surge? Parang hindi. So I think it's really hard time for us to reorganize. Okay? And how do we reorganize? We need to look back and take stock. Ano ba yung mga dapat natutunan natin sa nakaraang taon to make for a better response? Una po, syempre, yung importance of maintaining good hygiene and sanitation routine. Paglilinis, pagsusuot po ng face mask, paghuhugas ng kamay, scarf etiquette, proper disposal po ng ating mga PPE, paulit-ulit po yun. At every time, nakikita po natin na lahat po ng mga outbreak ay dahil po sa pagpapabaya natin on these practices. Isa din pong nakita natin na napakahalagang leksyon the past year is the growing potential of technology. The webinar that we're having now this afternoon is an example of that. Okay? Then we have seen the change in education and the way we do work and business. The importance of health and well-being and the importance of relationships and social structure. Napaka-importante po ng networks, coordinations, whole of society, and whole of government approach. Ito pong 4 Bs of the COVID-19 pandemic response. Actually, I came across this article last year pa po. But I believe this encapsulates the things that we really need to take into consideration as we move forward. These are biology, bureaucracy, bites, and behavior. It is the interplay of these 4 Bs po that would really make us win against COVID-19. What do we mean by biology? It is the evolving evidence po. So, dapat po nating maintindihan na nothing is permanent po sa science. What may be true today, baka bukas hindi na po. So, we always have to be very wary po sa evidence na nakikita po natin. So, we need to beware, be wary of mga fake news and charlatans. Alam niyo po ba, meron pong isang article on COVID na napapublish every 2 to 3 minutes. Ganun po karami. At ganun din po kabilis yung ating mga pagbabago tungkol po sa evidence that we are having on COVID, the vaccines, the medicines that we use, etc. So dapat din po ang ating bureaucracy is guided by this evidence. So an example of this lang po, just to cite an example, is this implementing guidelines of it's a joint memorandum circular of these 5 government agencies, DOLE, DOH, DLG, Department of Tourism, and DTI. So ito po siya, it aims to give this safety seal to establishments, to workplaces po that are able to comply with these 3 things. And parang pareho lang naman po siya ng dati, except for this pang-apat po na requirement. No less than Secretary Bello have recognized already the importance of proper ventilation in the workplace. This is very important po kasi po for the longest time, hindi po ito nire-recognize. But now, there is actually a move na po na titingnan na po talaga yung air quality in the workplace. So it's very important. It was already emphasized in our video kanina, yung HEPA filters, for example, in CMI. That's an example po of how yung engineering po ng ating air and ventilation systems is very important now because of the fact na nagbago na nga po ang ating kaalaman tungkol sa COVID. We now know that it is airborne. Okay? So this is an app that can actually be used. If you want to try this, you can do this at home. You can calculate po the limits on safe occupancy following the entrance of a single infected person into your house. So you might try to visit this po later on. Then other things po, yung disinfection, pinapakita din po ng evidence ngayon that surface transmission is unlikely to be a major route. So hindi na po talaga ngayon yung fomites and surface transmission. Then because of this, dun po sa living CPG, foot baths are no longer recommended. Misting tents are no longer recommended. The use of ionizing air purifiers and UV lamps are also not recommended. However, the use of HEPA filters as an option to improve air quality in indoor spaces with inadequate ventilation is suggested. So ito po yung mga titingnan natin in our workplaces. Ano po yung mga kailangan natin gawin para po maayos po natin ang ating ventilation. So aside from that po, ito po pareho pa rin. We need to wear the face shield and the face mask. We need to establish a referral system, proper waste disposal, and the designation of the safety officer. So dapat po in our workplaces and even in our barangay, dapat po meron nagko-coordinate with the appropriate bodies, government agencies for the referral, support on community-based isolation, contact tracing, monitoring of people who are in quarantine or isolation, and the implementation of return to work policies. So another pagbabago po on our guidelines, we do not require anymore a repeat negative RT-PCR test for discharge of immunocompetent patients. So symptom-based na lang po ang ating strategy. So based on this po, HPAC actually recommends the adherence to apat dapat in all settings. We also called for the coordination and a unified response. Ibig sabihin, mula po sa IATF, NTF, hanggang sa kaliit-liitang barangay, dapat pare-pareho po ang ating pag-implement ng ating mga policy. There should also be inter- and intra-LGU coordination. We also pushed for the use of information communications technology to have an end-to-end test, trace, treat na integration po. So we are now working on this together with other agencies para po magkaroon po tayo ng end-to-end na digital solutions. We are also lobbying to ensure access for safe transportation and open spaces and the extension po of social protection towards universal healthcare and income support for those affected. We were actually already on our way, para po ma-achieve po sana natin ang universal healthcare. But according to Secretary Duque, the pandemic actually triggered, or supposedly paved the way for faster implementation of health reforms. Ito po, yung mga COVID-19 best practices, which are actually in line po doon sa mga provisions po ng Universal Healthcare Law. So these promising and innovative developments in primary healthcare have actually been accelerated by this pandemic. And these efforts need to be further expanded in order to make our health system more resilient against future health emergencies. Health is actually an investment, and we need to work doubly hard in order for us to achieve universal health care. We need also to anchor universal health care on primary care strengthening. And in primary health care strengthening, we're talking about health promotion and disease prevention. We're talking about periodic health examinations, vaccination programs, and health-seeking behavior and health education. And we can we have that, we can offer that to you in CMI, because in CMI, we believe in preventive healthcare. And we are here to make that a reality for you. So thank you for your kind attention. Over to you, Bambina.
Thank you so much, Dr. Espina. That was very informative. I'm going to turn you over now to Dr. Michael T. But just before I turn you over, let me just add a little bit of information about Dr. T. He is also Vice Chancellor for Planning and Development at UP Manila. He's a professor of the College of Medicine, where he teaches physiology, rheumatology, and research. He worked with international collaborators in the development of the anti-IFN vaccine for lupus and has published several papers on the psychological effects of COVID-19 with international co-authors. Dr. T is the lead author of the recently published guidance on the COVID-19 immunization of patients with autoimmune inflammatory rheumatic diseases. The validation study he conducted with UP, University of Illinois, and the Philippine Red Cross on the use of saliva RT-qPCR for the diagnosis of COVID-19 led to the DOH approval of this more affordable and less inconvenient testing procedure that has benefited more than 150,000 Filipinos since January 26, 2021. Dr. T, I turn over to you.
Thank you. Let me now share my screen for a while. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank the Centro Medical International for this opportunity to present to you some viral lessons. And I'd like to take off from the previous lecture or presentation by Dr. Eileen Espina. Viral lessons, because really we want to make this a viral lesson in the social media kind of sense. Because there's a wave. When we talk about surges, we talk about waves, there are components. And the recent surge taught us that there are variants amongst us. There was no vacancy in many of the hospitals, that there is a need to isolate voluntarily, improve vaccination, and value the resources that we have as a nation. There are variants. Before, when I first presented this lecture, only two variants of concerns was in the Philippines. But now we have also the Indian variant. 10 more variants found in the Philippines. That's in addition to the initial two. What's good is that we were ready to face that. And so I am optimistic that the impact will not be as bad as what happened with the UK variant. When we talk about variants of concern, it means three things. It's either it increases transmissibility, it creates or results of more severe disease, and even those who have been vaccinated or those who had previous infection will not be able to produce an antibody or did not produce an antibody that can effectively neutralize the virus. I put increase in transmissibility in bold letter because that's what's proven about the UK variant and the Indian variant. There was a surge, and what happened because of the increased transmissibility was surge in hospital capacity. There was breakdown in what the hospital can still accept as number of patients. Advisories sprouted everywhere, and even PGH was telling us during the first surge, sarado po ang OPD ng PGH. No vacancy, and you'll see that this is taken 10 minutes ago from the National Red Cross NCR Hospital. Out of the 157 hospitals in the National Capital Region, 18 hospitals are still 100% capacity. And the 60% cutoff is achieved only after you run down from the first to the 70th hospital. So means out of the 157, 70 or nearly 50% are still way above the 60% safe level. When you look at the NCR now versus surge peak, March 29 to April 4, and on your right is May 4 to 10, you'll see that there is improvement. I'd like to focus your attention to the ICU beds occupied. You'll see that the ICU beds occupied is 79% during the peak of the surge, and now it's only 60%. And then note that the beds occupied actually increased, meaning it's good that our healthcare authorities was able to increase the number of hospitals and the number of hospital beds, ICU beds for our patients. So it's not true that nothing was being done during the time. In fact, there's a lot of activities in improving our healthcare system. What's sad is that during that month, April 2 to May 3, we saw 4,205 Filipinos die. And that accounted for 23.99%. 1 month out of the 14 months or so, and you get 1/4 of the number of patients dying during that period. Thus, with all of these problems in the hospitals, it's important that we have an alternative way of consulting our doctors. And telemedicine is a key component of care. The Department of Health recognizes that as a primary care service. PGH talks about not telebabad but telebaga so that you can consult. Telehealth modalities can either be synchronous, meaning you hook up, I hook up, and then we talk either through an app, through our usual telemedicine platform. In some patients of the Philippine General Hospital, what's used is commonly used is Messenger for synchronous. Sometimes you can do asynchronous, which means I may not be online now, but you can send me your laboratories and then I'll tell you what to do. Text me your complaints and then I'll text you back. So that's the kind of asynchronous telehealth consultation. Third will be remote patient monitoring, meaning after I diagnose you and I prescribe you, we can now go on a monitoring scheme so that I will know how you feel over the days. And this is among the modalities being used for patients who self-isolate at home. It's good that the CMI is able to provide teleconsultation because that lessens the load in the clinic as well as ensures that only those patients who do not have symptoms of COVID-19 are able to do face-to-face consultation. In fact, if you have other conditions, you have to be screened first before you enter into a facility. And teleconsultation allows us to pre-screen patients for that purpose. You have to disaggregate the COVID and non-COVID ill patients. Like in PGH for COVID, we have telegabay, meaning a specialized group of doctors will just talk to patients with COVID-related illnesses. While CMI at this time is able to also help the non-COVID related consultations by specialists. Like if you have arthritis, how can that be related to COVID? So if Dr. Krista Rubio is able to do teleconsultations with you, then you might feel relieved. And if it's still symptoms persist, then you can be advised to go to her for any procedure that requires really face-to-face treatment because you cannot do procedures over the phone. Primary care and preventive care, including vaccination, is important. During the past year, I've been actively vaccinating, not for COVID because that's only for programs of the government, but elderlies who have to be vaccinated for pneumonia as well as flu vaccination. it's good that the pharmacy of CMI is able to supply those needs so that our patients do not need to go back and forth. Yes, I can vaccinate you tomorrow. No, in CMI, I will vaccinate you. Okay, can we do it now? Of course, we can do it now. So in all of these problems with COVID, testing is very important. That's why history and physical examination is always part of test. No, it's part of diagnosis. And the usual standard that we say is a nucleic acid amplification test, or what is commonly known as swab, and saliva. Mind you, it's only Philippine Red Cross has saliva test for nucleic acid amplification. Then there's rapid antigen and rapid antibody testing, which I will also discuss. It's important to detect the asymptomatic because indeed more than 1 million tests until December 31, 2020 done by Red Cross, we saw that the majority of patients, 90% are asymptomatic and only 9% are symptomatic, of which it is the pensioners, the more than 65 years old, who will present with symptoms. That's really based on this graph where you have pre-infectious positive for PCR. And this is the green that is very important for contact tracing. This green until the first area, the infectious, because it is the problematic phase where patients can become a spreader. You always hear spreader, and that's the spreader period. So saliva is important because it is able to detect even in asymptomatic and mild COVID-19 infection. And our own paper validates the use of saliva of the Philippine Red Cross. Even the Philippine COVID Living Clinical Practice Guideline of UP Manila tells us that saliva in RT-PCR is good. So DOH approved that, and it is available, cheaper, easier, and non-invasive. Antigen testing, we hear that. We are familiar with that, but it is useful only for patients who are symptomatic. If you're contact traced but still asymptomatic, then you still need to check it for presence of nucleic acid, meaning you do a PCR if it's positive. But if the patient is symptomatic, was exposed, then a positive test should be counted as infected for SARS-CoV-2. It is useless for asymptomatic or those without known exposure. So in our audience of about 107, many of you are maybe captains of industry, owners of your company. I advise you against using antigen testing algorithm for this antigen testing for testing your employees who are asymptomatic. Do not use that. It will only waste your money. Rapid antigen testing is only for symptomatic, early phase of the disease, the infectious and the green in my earlier graph, and specific brands which demonstrate 80% sensitivity and high specificity. Sensitive means if it's 80%, it means that among 100% patients who are truly positive, you will pick up at least 80 of them. Now, antigen testing, you cannot use saliva for rapid antigen testing. And it's strongly recommended that you do not use that. And even patients who are asymptomatic, you cannot use that. I emphasize that because I really do not like to waste our resources on this. And Ma'am Eileen already talked about testing asymptomatic employees returning to work. You do not do RT-PCR after the patient recovers because you may get a positive test, but it means nothing because it may be a remnant that is no longer viable and non-culturable. What you need is to check for symptoms and for close contact. We need to isolate these patients voluntarily because look, if you are an owner of a company, your employees will be the less than 59 years old or maybe less than 65. Dr. Benjico, who will speak later, compiled this and tells us that while 87% of our sick or positive patients are less than 60 years old, it is in the 13% or the more older than 60 who get worse, and they represent 63% of our patients who died because of COVID. This inequality tells us that the vulnerable population has to be protected, and you protect them by isolating those who are infected. And it is in that I said many months ago, the BERT or Barangay Health Emergency Response Team must lead in the efforts to bring infected patients to isolation facilities, not quarantine. It was placed here as quarantine if not yet known, but isolation facilities. Otherwise, we will see families and households being infected. And we saw that during the surge. Isolation facilities help prevent spread. That's why on Good Friday this year, we had a meeting with the LGU, and many of the LGUs agreed. So we created isolation facilities using our universities, which are not used at this time for educational purposes. So we repurpose them with Red Cross, LGU, and universities such as, in this case, UP Camia, Ateneo, LaSalle, Adamson, and even Makati Science High School as isolation facilities. Because if you do not, look at the difference in surge mortality. This is busy slide, but on the left you see that before March 1, 18% of patients die because of COVID. While after that, it's 22%. We had 409 deaths from March 1 to May 11, and that represents 44% of total deaths in PGH. While during that period from March 1 to May 11, 30.1% died. So that's 3 out of 10 dying because of COVID-19. When you have COVID, you get admitted, 3 out of 10 will die during surge period. Isolate because non-seniors are getting infected but seniors are dying. Isolate voluntarily, especially if you have multi-generational household, and home isolation is not for everybody. So you have to consult and be advised whether you can be accommodated in your own homes. So you have to ask. Voluntarily isolating will decrease demand in care. Asymptomatic and mild will require only 4 nurses for 20 to 50 patients in an isolation facility. Moderate, 4 per 8 patients in the ward. And severe, 1:1 na yan. 4 nurses per 4 patients in a critical care setting. And it is a resource depleting condition that we need to address. Surge capacity in the NCR was computed. And our computation tells us that we can only be comfortable if less than 2,850 to about 3,414 new cases per day happens. More than that, we run the risk of breaking hospital capacity. So we need to now work on improving vaccination, and I'm glad to tell you that in the last presentation by Secretary Galvez and Secretary Vince Dizon, they are saying that we might be able to get up to 21 million doses of vaccines by the end of June. And we're seeing good delivery now. While we have heard news about baka hindi maubos, I'm telling you that our LGUs are stepping up. Even Red Cross is stepping up to become a vaccination center in many of our regions where we have 105 chapters. Vaccination will prevent infection, prevent disease, prevent hospital admission, ICU admission, and even death. That's the basis for what is recommended now by CDC as no more mask for them. But that is for them because they have achieved high rates of vaccination. And because vaccines are preventive and not therapeutic, be aware that the stringent quality control is more stringent even compared to therapeutics, because you don't want something preventive to create a problem that you induce. Primum non nocere. So improve immune status, it should reduce circulation of the infectious agent and modify the epidemiology of disease. These are factors. If you ask me, what will I get the antibody? Really, it's a lot of social media talks on antibody testing, but maybe Dr. Ko will educate us more about that in relation to antibody production and T cell or memory cell response. But these are the factors: your behavior, whether you're going to still be exposed after your vaccination, and how often you will be exposed, are things that you can control. For vaccine efficacy, these are just how it's computed. It does not mean that 50%, 50 or 5% or 95% of the population. No, you compare how many had COVID between those who were vaccinated and those in placebo. So the resources we value now, we have to talk about, because India valued its resources, meaning they're saying we'll keep our vaccines for now, we'll keep our remdesivir for now. But look at what we are doing. It is the UK telling us that our nurses are really good. So we must value them, because who will take care of the patients? You may have the beds, ventilators, and medicine, and the new facilities that our Secretary of the Department of Public Works and Highways is doing. But who will man that? Lastly, I'd like to talk about the psychological impact of COVID-19. That's why we have to participate in the national effort to rise up again. Otherwise, this impact that we are seeing in the early stage will persist and even worsen. We had more than 28% with anxiety, stress, and depression was about 20%. That's not good. So we have to take action to create lasting changes. If you're an employer, you'll have a compliance monitoring program. You modify your workspace to provide adequate ventilation, maximize work from home, provide shuttle services. If you're doing good, you have good profit, share it a little by providing shuttle services, because that's an investment, not an expense. Isolate your employees. You can coordinate that with the birth and the local government unit. And in case a clustering of infection happens in your workplace, be ready to identify that. You will never know that you had mild COVID until after 14 days. And sometimes it's too late to realize that you had critical COVID. So do not dismiss COVID, because what's reported by the Department of Health as mild, asymptomatic, are during the time of testing. So if you test early, most of them will be mild or asymptomatic. But it is these people who progress to moderate, severe, or die. So these are the waves that we have to ride, the viral lessons, and we hope that we are able to wipe them out so that we can come back to the normal that we know, and the normal that Ma'am Eileen is prescribing as a public health expert. Thank you very much and good afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. T, for those interesting perspectives on COVID and the vaccines. We're going to turn now to Dr. Ko, Dr. Benjamin Ko.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invite, and okay, thank you everyone for staying on. Thank you, Mike, for providing an introduction to what I will talk about this afternoon. Hopefully, I should be able to do this in the next 15 minutes. Okay, there's one conflict of interest that I would like to disclose. I am the principal investigator of an ongoing, well, of an upcoming clinical trial that is going to be conducted for the treatment of COVID. So with that, let me provide to you the objectives of the talk. The sequence of presenters are actually according to age. So I'm the oldest among the three, so ako yung huli. The basic objectives of the talk is to provide you an overview on COVID-19 vaccine development today. Some of you have listened to my previous lectures, and therefore we'll just talk about updates. Second is to elucidate on the challenges in the rollout of vaccines and the global vaccine shortage, which becomes the global problem is our problem as well. And of course, the most popular question that is asked day in and day out is, can we mix and match different vaccines? So we'll talk about the good, the bad, and the uncertain. Now, let me start off with bad news. And I'd like always to start off with bad news because the good news comes later. And therefore, let's put the things into the proper perspective when I begin with the New York Times lead story last May 3, that herd immunity is unlikely in the US. And experts now believe that. And I believe the same thing is in the Philippines and globally, because there is no end game to this. The circulating coronavirus variants, the persistent hesitancy on vaccines will keep this goal out of reach. I'm sure we all noticed that also in the Philippines, where you roll out one vaccine and a lot of people go and crowd for that Pfizer vaccine, but if it is a China-made vaccine, a lot of people will not go to those centers to get immunized. So the virus is here to stay, and the vaccination for the most vulnerable may be enough to restore normalcy, but that is all that we can do, restore normalcy, because herd immunity will be a very big challenge. And I don't think it is something that we see in the immediate future, rather than making a long promised exit, and the virus will most likely become manageable. It will continue to circulate like flu. It will still cause hospitalization and deaths, but it will do so in smaller numbers. And the virus is changing too quickly, more quickly than we have realized. Over 1 year, we've had variants of concern that have popped up. We have 4 in the Philippines, from 1117 to 1135 to 1617.2 to P.1. And we have a variant of interest, P.3, which is one that is homegrown in the Visayas. So the new variants spreading too easily, and vaccination proceeding too slowly for herd immunity to be within any reach anytime soon. And the virus is unlikely to go away, but we want to do all we can to check that it's likely to become a mild infection. So that's the reason why we want to emphasize on vaccination. We will not achieve herd immunity as a country until we have enough immunity in the population as a whole. And I'd like to emphasize that to the audience out there, that it's going to be very difficult to achieve herd immunity if everybody wants the vaccine for himself. There are people that ask me the question, I've had Sinovac, when can I get Pfizer? I've had Astra, when can I get Pfizer? I've had this vaccine, when can I get Moderna? Because I've ordered it. I mean, why do we want it all in all our bodies? And this is the first time I've heard people ask me that question. Can I get this after the next few months? When the next few months something arrives, herd immunity is not achieved in one individual. We have to vaccinate everyone out there. So vaccines are the way out, but no vaccines are readily available. And that's quite difficult to say that vaccines will be the answer to solving the economic problems in the pandemic. We have to remember that we need to share whatever vaccines are made available, And the current challenge now are the class B and E. So what does the future hold? If herd immunity is not attainable, what matters most is actually what Dr. T was mentioning, as Mike was mentioning a while ago. We need to bring down the rate of hospitalization and the rate of deaths after pandemic restrictions are relaxed. So where are we with vaccines today? This is as of May 15, and that's 4 days ago. On the current coronavirus vaccine tracker, we still are with 6 authorized and 8 approved, but I'll take a jab at a few of those that are in the early phases of clinical trial. And it's exciting because there are a lot of vaccines that will come into the picture eventually. And this is the most updated edition. Let's start with the last update on May 3 of Denmark announcing that it will not use Johnson & Johnson's vaccine after J&J and the US FDA has announced that there are the blood clot problems for the J&J vaccine are quite alarming for them. The beauty of the J&J vaccine, however, is that it's a single dose, but some of the countries are now considering that its safety profile may be problematic. And then you have also the authorization of Russia on its new Gamaleya vaccine. We've heard of Sputnik V. That was rolled out in the country a few weeks, last week and the week before. But they have approved a single dose version called Sputnik Light. So this is something that we want to, we're looking forward to, if they will donate Sputnik Light to us. You know, a one dose version of a vaccine is always welcome because it's very hard to make people return for immunizations. And the WHO giving EUA to Sinopharm last May 7. The approval of the US FDA on the Pfizer BioNTech or Comirnaty vaccine for children 12 to 15 years old. Now, just because it is approved in the US for this age group does not mean it is approved in the Philippines for this age group as well. I think a lot of people say, approved na sa US, pwede na din sa Pilipinas. No, that's a change in label. And therefore, Pfizer will have to apply for that change in label locally. And the Philippine Food and Drug Administration will have to approve that change in label before it can be used in children 12 to 15. And the LGU should not even attempt to extend that approval without a Philippine FDA approval. Mga LGUs dito maraming their own kingdom kasi. All right. If you look at all of the leading vaccines that we have, all of them, except for Novavax, have EUA approval. So the subunit protein vaccine, Novavax, does not still have EUA approval even in the US. So let's talk about, in the next couple of 10 minutes left, I'll talk about what's coming soon. And it's an exciting field because some of these vaccines are already in phase 3. And CureVac's COVID-19 vaccine is also an mRNA. This is a German company. The beauty of CureVac is that it does not need to be stored in ultra low temperature. We do not need Zulig anymore here, no, for the ultra low temperature of Zulig. So what you need is you just keep it in the refrigerator, it's stable in the ref, and it sits for 24 hours at room temperature before it is used. So that's the beauty of this vaccine. It's an mRNA-based vaccine also. The trial readout expected at the end of May shows that CureVac will publish details on its primary goal of preventing COVID-19 across all various virus variants, and they will disclose efficacy data on the most common circulating variant of concern, which is the 1117. All infections in the trial will undergo genetic sequencing of any variant, which will now offer a unique picture of variations of the pathogen in both Europe and Latin America. So it has more solid data in vivo, which means in humans, unlike the mRNA data of Pfizer and Moderna, which are all in vitro, which means that they are test tube examples. But in reality, how are the vaccines performing in the real world scenario? At best, and at best, the mRNA vaccines are touted to be 95% in the clinical trial. So at best, in the real world, they are 88 to 90%. And I report this to you because in the United States, they're monitoring breakthrough infections, which means that these are patients who have been fully immunized and yet go on to developing COVID. And breakthrough infections so far, in spite of the 100 million vaccines that have been administered there, amount to 9,000 plus females, with females having the most, and those that are in the elderly age group as well. So 45% are those that are over 60 years old. So it's a warning to the elderly population that there may be problems in the immunogenicity for the elderly population. But just because you get the shots does not necessarily mean that you are fully protected from COVID-19. And you see it also occur among asymptomatics. You get asymptomatic infections, it still results in hospitalization, and eventually there are some people that will still die. And the data is an undercount. These are only from states and from cities that actually report breakthrough infections. And not all real-world breakthrough cases will be identified because of lack of testing, particularly if the patients are asymptomatic or mild. But I'd like to show you the power of vaccination using this study, which was published last May 5. And this is the story of Israel, a country of 9 million people, unfortunately, going through a more difficult crisis now, not because of COVID, but because of war. And the nationwide vaccination campaign in Israel is the perfect story to be told. It's the story of how vaccines work and how lockdowns together with vaccines work. This is what happened to them. If you see, they launched their vaccination campaign. They're one of the first countries to launch a vaccination campaign, actually, in December of 2020. But their cases continued to rise. So they instituted an initial lockdown a week later. And in spite of the lockdown, they still saw a rise in cases. So they instituted a total lockdown in the early part of January. Notice that it took them 3 months for that initial lockdown. They continued their immunization. They went full speed ahead. Now they have over 70% of the eligible population immunized. They continued their immunization in spite of the lockdowns. You will see that after their initial lockdown and continuing immunization, the lockdown helped bring down the cases. And as the cases went down, they went full steam ahead with vaccination. This is where they were at the end of April. So while we see our cases go down now, this is the time when we need to roll out all the vaccines. And I hate to say it, but it should be no man left behind. So kahit na yung nasa class D and E should be encouraged to get immunized. And this is their vaccine efficacy. They only use one. They paid actually 3 times the cost for their Pfizer vaccines. You'll see that across all age groups, their vaccine efficacy is very high for SARS-CoV-2 infection against symptomatic, related hospitalization, against severe or critical, and beautiful even against dying. So Israel is the perfect example where vaccination with 2 doses of a single vaccine has high efficacy and effectiveness against a range of SARS-CoV-2 outcomes, including older adults, because they have excellent studies in the elderly, offering hope that COVID-19 vaccination will eventually control the pandemic. But we're looking at a country where you have 9 million people and where 70% of it has been immunized, and they have the resources for a lockdown and immunization. And these findings are of international importance as vaccination programs ramp up across the rest of the world, suggesting that countries can similarly achieve this and markets sustain declines if they can achieve high vaccine uptake. We know that vaccines are effective. Breakthrough cases occur only in a small percentage of vaccinated people. Vaccine COVID-19 vaccines are effective and that the CDC recommends that all eligible people get its vaccine as soon as one is available to them, regardless of the type. And the CDC recommends that fully vaccinated people continue to take steps to protect themselves in many other situations. And the DOH still continuously recommends us to do the apat-dapat, wear a mask, maintain a proper social distance, avoid crowds, poorly ventilated places, and wash our hands often because we still have only 2.5% of people that have received the first shot and only less than 1% of people being fully immunized in the country. So we go now to the good, the bad, and the uncertain. And I know a lot of people are waiting for this. I have 5 minutes to finish this, and I will talk as quickly as possible. There are, except for J&J, all currently available vaccines are 2 doses. No? Sputnik Light is not yet approved in the Philippines, neither does it have an EUA. It's only approved in Russia. Remember, the first dose primes the immune system. The second dose boosts it. That's how simple I can get and how basic I can educate people on what the first dose does and what the second dose does. So the first dose primes your immune system. You will not get very good efficacy after the first dose. It is the second dose that works. That's the reason why later on I will talk about patients who've had COVID-19 infections. Question is, can we mix the vaccine doses? Well, it will definitely improve the vaccine rollout because it will help people get fully immunized faster. And it can potentially boost the immunity provided. There is now data on this. However, the data on this is only on reactogenicity, which means mas maraming side effect. Okay? So if you want to mix, go ahead. Just be careful because the reactogenicity on days 24 and 84, or after the first and second dose, from the first to the second dose, sorry, not after the first and second, but from the first to the second dose is higher among patients who receive a heterologous vaccination, which means there are different platforms compared to patients who receive homologous immunization. Now, as to whether it improves the immunogenicity endpoints, we still don't know. But what we do know is that there are more reactions if you receive the vaccine from a different platform. Let's look at the difference. Like AstraZeneca and Pfizer vaccines, they prime the body's immune system to target the coronavirus spike protein, but they target different parts of the spike. AstraZeneca uses a weakened version of the common cold virus in chimpanzees. This is chimpanzee adenovirus ox, not Z, to present the spike protein to the immune system. While the Pfizer vaccine or the mRNA vaccines deliver genetic instructions to make the spike protein and encourage the human cells to produce it. So there are 2 different ways. They target different parts of the spike. So there are 2 different ways on how to develop an immunologic response. So think of it as a COVID-19 vaccines. They're like cargo trucks. They're different vehicles. They drop off their payloads by different means, but the spike protein cargo is the same. Theoretically, because the cargo is identical, the vaccine should, in theory, work well together. In simple sense, more than one arm of the immune system can boost the immunity on the whole. But, and again, with the but, is the safety issue. So in the real world, has this been done? Yes, like for example, the pneumonia vaccine. We start patients on the conjugate, which is Prevnar, and then give a boost of the polysaccharide, which is Pneumovax. Or the Sputnik V vaccine, for example, uses 2 different platforms. The first shot is a harmless cold virus, adenovirus 26, while the second shot is a scientifically engineered cold virus, which is adenovirus 5. So where does the skepticism lie? Well, the regulatory complication is the first. What happens if the first vaccine you give is authorized for EUA, but the second is not authorized for EUA? That becomes a problem. So for example, you get AstraZeneca, the Moderna arrives, but the Moderna does not still have EUA. What do? You cannot give the Moderna. You will still have to wait until the EUA for Moderna is approved. So that's just one example of a complication. And it is unknown whether the notion of using two different vaccines relying on two different underlying immunity boosting platform is actually counterproductive. And finally, the most important unanswered question is, will mixing it cause unwanted adverse reactions? We do now know that there are, for heterologous vaccination, there are more adverse reactions. You expect more fever, more pain, and more systemic side effects if you use heterologous platforms than if you use the same platforms. And that's only in 1,000 plus patients. What more if we now bring it out into the real world scenario? So there are clinical trials ongoing. There's one being done in the UK. That's where that initial data is, where they're mixing the platforms. There is one in Azerbaijan and Russia, where they're mixing platforms with Gamaleya and AstraZeneca. There is one being done in Spain, where the second dose is a Pfizer vaccine after the patients have received AstraZeneca as the first. And there is one being done in China, where CanSino Bio's adenovirus 5, or the viral vector vaccine, is being combined with Zhifei Longcom's protein subunit, which is the same as Novavax. So their second shot is a protein subunit vaccine. The first shot is an adenovirus viral vector vaccine. CanSino Bio is also now developing an inhaled vaccine, and Hong Kong is mixing Pfizer for the first shot and Sinopharm for their second. The last question is, if you've had COVID, do you need to get the complete dose? There are excellent studies now that show that there are various permutations. You can get a vaccine and then get infected in between. And I've seen a lot of patients lately that have gotten the vaccine, then get infected, maybe because of a crowded space where they get the shots in, and then eventually will need to get vaccinated. Or you can get the infection and then you get two vaccines later on, or you can get the infection and then just get one vaccine, or you can get the vaccine and then just get infected and then do not get the vaccine anymore. And data is showing now that you may not need to get the complete dose. And there are strong recommendations that those that do get infected can wait actually for 90 days before they get the second shot. In the Philippines, I think that is one thing that they should promote instead of rushing people to get the vaccine after they've developed COVID. And that's because there is lack of COVID vaccines being made available. When there is paucity in the availability of vaccines, we put people who need the vaccine in the front of the line. And patients who have developed COVID already have antibodies against COVID, and therefore may not need the vaccine way ahead. And some of the studies have shown also that patients who develop an infection may just need a single dose of the vaccine eventually. But these are not standard recommendations yet. They're still in preprint. Some of them have been published, but this is an exciting time to see it. Last slide. Vaccines are able to prevent in large part severe diseases, but the challenges of variants is actually complicating the picture. We need to manage our expectations. We cannot expect miracles in spite of vaccines because they are from different platforms and may perform differently in the real world as we are seeing them now. But the third piece of the pie that is missing is treatment. So we have three sections of the pie. The first is the preventive aspect physically, which means we do the apat-dapat, the physical distancing, so on and so forth. The second part is the development of vaccines. That came very beautifully. Now we have two-thirds of the pie, and therefore we address the war against COVID in 66% with 66% armamentarium. In order to achieve 100% armamentarium, we need the last third of the pie. And the last third of the pie is treatment. Because once treatment is available, then that means this pandemic is wiped out. Because there's been progress in various treatment options with monoclonal antibody combinations, whether it's given subcutaneously or intravenously, the outcomes have been very good. We did not have that at the beginning of the pandemic. We have that option now. Unfortunately, it's not available to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. And then there are the antivirals, favipiravir and molnupiravir, are exciting times for antivirals. These are repurposed. They've been used for SARS, they've been used for Ebola, and they've been very effective in them. With one of them actually being given as prophylaxis. So it's like oseltamivir. No? Oseltamivir is an antiviral drug used for the treatment and prevention of flu. So once you start symptoms and take it early, the symptoms are actually mild among high-risk patients. And for those that are exposed, do not go on to developing influenza anymore. And you have also the J kinase inhibitors. Those are the NIBs. Baricitinib is one of those perfect examples. So addressing mild and moderate infections early on can stem the progression to severe disease, and we will not need ICUs and ventilators eventually. And of course, the wave of the future is the combination of several vaccines, including flu and COVID-19. And there is a need to plan for new surges and other outbreaks and pandemics. That's the lesson that we all learned this last year, because this pandemic will not be the last. Salamat po.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ko. That was kind of an ominous warning at the end of your presentation. But as you say, we have to learn the lessons from this pandemic and apply it should the next one come along. We should be more prepared for it. We have quite a few questions here. I'm going to direct them to all of you. Maybe Dr. Ko, you can answer this. There's talk about a booster for the vaccinations. So, later on, like if you take, I've heard actually people say, oh, after 6 months, I've taken Sinovac, but after 6 months, I'll take the Moderna or Pfizer. Is there any science to this, or will it become mandatory at some point?
Well, we don't have data yet. There is a preprint, no? And I've been going through some of the preprint data, which show you that we may not need boosters eventually. As a matter of fact, and I'm basing this from the HPV studies, no? I'm part of some of the HPV studies, the human papillomavirus. You see the girls get the vaccine during the 9 to 13 years old, okay? And you will see that the antibodies will wane significantly after they get their second shot. However, when they get exposed to HPV, you see that the immune response is well all the way up to the roof, which tells you that we may have waning antibodies eventually, but when we do get exposed to COVID later on, the protection will still kick in. So I'm not quite happy with requiring boosters for now. I would probably wait for more information later on.
Okay, but corollary to this is, someone is asking what your opinion is on the studies emerging that Sinovac's real-world efficacy is much better than the initial clinical trial results. Because I think a lot of people beginning.
Yeah. I have no comment for that in the meantime. Sinovac has kept quiet on its publications for real-world data and for its phase 3 clinical trials. So each of the countries have actually that roll out Sinovac have done individual studies on its own. and they've used immunologic endpoints, which I am not. Mike T should be able to answer that. I'm not really comfortable on the immune endpoints that some of the companies use and some of the clinical trials investigators, not companies, clinical trials and investigators use as endpoints on immunity. So I'd like to see a better antibody epitope endpoint rather than just using antibodies itself. Mike, you might want to answer the question.
Yeah, there are many component. There are many components in the vaccination response. Antibody production is just one of them. What's also important will be the development of memory T cells that can be called upon to be reactivated upon repeat exposure or real exposure to the virus. Remember that the vaccine will have protein components or induce you to develop protein components so that you can make antibodies against them. And then when there is no encounter, the antibodies will wane and be lost, undetected. But if you now reintroduce the same or similarly looking antigen, then the antigen presentation will wake up those sleeping giants of cells and create the antibodies for response. And these antibodies will now opsonize the bacteria, the virus, or any pathogen for that matter, and start eating them up and neutralizing them. So it's not sufficient to just look at antibodies.
But Dr. T, do you think that will be required? Would it help to have your antibodies measured after a certain amount of time? No, it doesn't mean anything.
If we do that, what is the level that's going to be acceptable?
Yes.
Yeah, the question is
Yeah.
what level will be acceptable? If it's already in the waning period and you don't know what's good or from what level you had, it will only create anxiety. And that's a useless anxiety.
I think there's some concern about being able to travel, right? Because some countries have said that, and I think that's going to change because you can't do a blanket thing and say only people vaccinated with, for example, Pfizer or Moderna or AstraZeneca will be allowed into their countries, whereas there are other vaccines around. But I'm just wondering in terms of real life, if maybe Dr. Spina, you're aware of anything on an intergovernmental level of restrictions regarding international travel?
Well, each country is supposed to make their own rules regarding their border control and security measures. And for example, in the US, they have vaccine immunity passports, but in the Philippines, they're not being honored. So for each country, it's really each country to its own. It's just like here in the Philippines, the IATF makes a policy, but each LGU is given the leeway to craft their own local ordinances, local policies with regards to the COVID response. And actually, what should be clear is the science behind it. There should be a clear interpretation of like when do you use an antigen test, when do you use an antibody test, and then you contextualize it based on the conditions in each particular LGU. So there's no really something set in stone as far as policies are concerned.
But if you're vaccinated, let's say you've gotten both shots and you travel, would you still need to present a negative PCR to be allowed on a flight? Is there any guidance on that so far? Or do you have to wait until a significant percentage of the population has been vaccinated?
Currently, the guidelines for us here is that you, even if you travel to the US, they would require you to present a negative RT-PCR test like 48 hours before you board your flight. So at the moment, that is the policy. We don't know how it will evolve in the coming days, if we will be able to achieve herd immunity. But listening to the lecture of Dr. Benji Ko, herd immunity seems to be so far-fetched as an ideal. So we really can't say anything definite at the moment. Everything is evolving as we speak.
And we do know that there are people who've flown abroad to get their shots, right? Because they were waiting and waiting here. They didn't want to take this, they wanted to take that. But they still are required to do quarantine once they get here, right? I think DOH has in fact increased it to 10 days, if I'm not mistaken.
It
Yeah.
has been decreased. It has been decreased actually.
Yeah.
The quarantine period has been decreased. Right, Mike? Doc Mike, no? There
Uh,
is now a test-based strategy for that. The returning OFWs, they are now quarantining for 7 days, and then on the seventh day, they get an RT-PCR, and if it's a negative, they are allowed to be discharged from quarantine, but with strict instructions to strictly adhere to the minimum public health standards and to still monitor themselves for any symptoms that might develop within the next 7 days to still complete the 14 days quarantine period as originally prescribed.
Dr. Mike, you want to add something?
I'll add something. You know, quarantine and border control has its own function. And one of the functions would be to prevent the entry of variants. Because we do not know whether a variant of concern will emerge. And whether a variant of interest now, meaning just a variant without any harm, can evolve and still evolve in terms of our understanding. The virus will no longer evolve. It's already a variant, but our understanding of the virus, its variant, will evolve and allow us to say that it is going to increase spread, transmissibility, it is going to cause more serious death, and number three, it will evade immune response. So even if you're vaccinated and you're exposed to a variant of concern that evades immune response, you have the risk. That is why in the race for immunity or herd immunity, we all have to be in the race. You cannot say, I'll be left out, because if you're not vaccinated, you are a petri dish for variation. You're a petri dish for mutation. So you may not die of it because you're young, you don't have comorbidity, but what about your parents? Even if they are vaccinated and you became the vessel for that variation, you pose a risk to those around you. So please, those who are listening now, tell your tell your friends, tell 10 of your friends to be vaccinated and tell them to tell 10 of their friends. That's the only way we can advocate for vaccination. And if they have a problem and they don't understand, call CMI for teleconsultation so that they can be advised more properly.
What about, I think also rollout, the vaccine rollout here in our country has also emphasized a lot of the problems. We're an island nation, and getting the vaccines to other islands and provinces has also been quite challenging, right? There was a thing about a bangka capsizing that had the vaccine. So what else could we do as a nation on a, either LGU or departmental, level
One,
to
uh,
do that?
one of the things that's being developed by a fellow of the Okta Research is a yeast-based vaccine that can be given orally. It's in its very early stage, but Father Nicanor Austriaco is doing that in his laboratory at the Providence College in Long Island. So that's something that can be done because you can store that for 2 years. You don't need any storage. You bring it in your pocket and you go house to house and give it to children, give it to adults, give it to elderlies. Of course, everything that I'm saying is speculative because while they have expressed the spike protein in the yeast, you now need to do clinical trial, phase 1 clinical trial, or even preclinical trial. No? So it has to be done in mice and then in men. Only then can we say, yeah, it's good. But as the number of cases go down, doing a vaccine trial becomes more difficult because you need a certain number of positive patients in the vaccinated and the unvaccinated to have the power to say this is the efficacy. So you cannot use it when your positivity rate is very low. But that's something that we all pray for. So you don't pray for higher positivity just to be able to test a vaccine. You have to increase your sample size.
If I may add, regarding our being an archipelagic country, it's actually both a blessing and a curse, if you may say so. Bad news, sabi nga ni Dr. Benji, because there are some logistical issues in transporting the vaccines from one island to the other. But it is also a natural border control measure, because since we are isolated from each other, we can actually prevent the virus from moving from one place to another. And there are really cases wherein we have very small incidents of COVID-19 in a community. And if you have a very strong field epidemiological surveillance you can nip the chain of transmission in the bud and control it before it becomes a sustained, localized, community level transmission. So that is what we meant, or what I meant earlier, by developing resilient health systems, so that our health system is able to detect very early on the presence of the virus in the community and cut the chain of transmission early, so that it does not really spread all throughout the community. So that's what we can do while waiting for the vaccine to arrive.
But Dr. Benji, you mentioned something about class. How do we reach out to them though? Because they don't fall under the category A priorities.
They do. They do. I mean, a lot of them are A3. A lot of them are
A lot of
A2.
them are A3, yes, it's true. But what about those
Yeah.
that are? I mean, I saw like in the
Right.
categories.
Unless talagang indigent sila na A5. That's the
Yeah.
A5 category. But a lot of them fall under A2 and a lot of them fall under A3. But they
In
don't
fact,
want to get immunized.
I think a lot of them don't even realize they fall under A3 or A2 because they don't realize they have high blood pressure
Yeah,
or
but that's something that I was actually making notes a while ago. I said, you see, um, while telehealth is beautiful, it is not beautiful for the poor.
Mm.
No, it's something that's difficult. Uh, Imagine to get vaccinated, you need to register through an app,
Yes.
or you need to go online.
Mm.
I mean, their daily bread they cannot buy, and yet we're requiring them to go through the app. Has anybody ever tried registering through the local government? Each of the local governments will differ, and some of them are in full English. Half of them do not even understand what they're ticking, and then they will have to upload a government ID. Oh, to me, the local government, duh, you already have them as their voters list. Why in God's name do you know you need them only when during an election, right? Yeah, so it's really difficult. I think you need to encourage them. Maybe some systems would be, like I said, on one of my social media posts, what was in a community pantry, you might want to put the vaccination way
Oh,
ahead. So that means that you get immunized first before you go to the whole community pantry, or you do double or nothing. I double your ayuda if you get immunized. And these are things that they think about their daily bread more than that's the reason also why they're afraid to they're so scared to get tested, because once they get tested and the bird find out that they're positive, they'll drag them away. Natatakot silang damputin, dalhin sa isolation, hindi na sila makakapagtrabaho. And that's where I think we need to think out of the box for the class DNE.
mm.
Just to share, Sir Benji, in one of the companies that I'm doing technical assistance for, one of the administrative policies that really changed the behavior of the employees was that when they rewarded people who were reporting symptoms, and they were given leave with pay if they voluntarily go on quarantine if they were identified as close contacts within the company. And hindi siya, it was not being deducted from their leave credits if they are placed on quarantine as a result of the contact tracing activities of the workplace. So securing, really putting in an enabling environment that would allow people to comply with the requirements of isolation, quarantine, is a good strategy really to modify behavior. So it's not just about communicating all of these things. We also need to put in an enabling environment that would really enable people to comply. I think that's one of the more important things that we need to recognize.
But Dr. Eileen, just the corollary to what you were saying about the workplace, there's a question here addressed to you.
Yeah.
That at what point can companies justify asking their employees to return to the office after working from home?
Yeah.
I have heard of employees choosing to resign from their companies rather than be forced to physically report to work.
Yeah. Well, it depends. We have been working with DOLE and with PICOM regarding this matter. So as I've said in my talk, COVID has really re-engineered the way we do work, the way we do business. So you really have, as an employer, you have to ask yourself, why do I want this person to report for work physically? Is that person, is my employee able to be productive? Are they able to deliver the required deliverables despite working from home? If the answer is yes, then why are you insisting that they report for work physically? Because if you will insist on having everyone present in the workplace at the same time, you have to expand your physical space because you need to allow for enough space. The requirement is around 4 square meters per person. And then you look into the crowding index, you look into the carbon dioxide emission. Because in the safety seal requirement of the JMC, one of the things that you're being asked to comply with is the carbon dioxide concentration in the room. And then you need to measure the air circulation and all of those stuff. So maybe you need to look into your company profile and try to identify what are the work what are the process flow, the work that can be carried out remotely, and what are the things that should be in the office, who really needs to be there, how often do they need to be there, because it will also decongest traffic, because there will be less people commuting to work on a day-to-day basis. Can we have staggered work hours? Can we have shortened work weeks? All of those things. So I do agree with Dr. Benji and Dr. Mike that we need to think out of the box. We need to come up with a new way of doing things, because it's not how it should be anymore. Yeah. So
Yeah, can I say something,
Yes, of course.
Bambina? Can I say something? Yeah, I get one of the things that I usually get as a complaint from moms and dads are HR people that insist on requiring a negative PCR before some of the people are able to go back to work. I do not know where they get that from, and maybe they need to consult with they need to get a doctor on board. But that it's, that company can get sued. That's against DOLE practice. And I warn the companies that do this, that you insist on requiring a negative swab before a patient is able to return to work, because some of the patients may still remain positive even after the third or fourth swab. I have patients that are still positive after 3 months. And that does not mean that you're going to put the patient, make the patient stay at home. Unfortunately, that's the way the technology of PCR is. Unfortunately, it's not able to determine whether it is a live virus or it is skeletal remains that remain. And that's the reason why we go through the process of making sure that the patients are examined by physicians, and it is up to the doctor who gives the permit or allows the patient to go back to work. That is more important.
I think we have time for one more question, and it's related to what you said, Dr. Ko, but this is directed to Dr. T. If you've recovered as an erstwhile COVID patient after the lapse of 14 days, when is it advisable to undergo a swab test as continually?
Number one, it's already stated that you do not recommend a test before asking the patient to return to work. Number two, the other question I'd like to address is a difficult question, but at what point can the company justify? It would be that the work itself cannot be done at home anymore. Because if you can do it at home, it is best to allow us, an employee, to do it at home. But if you have sensitive materials that cannot be brought home, by all means, you're justified to bring them back to the office. Number two, you should be able to prove that you comply with all the occupational safety and health requirements mandated by the Department of Labor and Employment as well as the Department of Health in joint circular. You have internal audit in your company that can audit your system to do that. Third, you must have proven that you have a system to detect and isolate employees who have a virus in them. You cannot just let them work and then have no monitoring system because your workplace may be compliant, you might have the good ventilation, you might be opening windows, but your employees can get the virus not at work during transportation on terminals, some of which are closed and not open air. So it is in this situation that you have to be proactive and be able to isolate them and have a system. Because if you're a registered business company, then you can always demand from the local government unit to have a coordinating personnel so that your HR can tell them, boss, our patient has one of my employees is symptomatic. I will hold him in isolation in this office because we discovered it here. We will not allow him to spread the virus on his way back to home. So please pick him up here or I will have an ambulance send the patient to your isolation center for testing and then isolate him back again here. Because those are things that are not only for your company but for public health purposes. You don't want a positive or suspiciously positive patient to be spreading the virus while commuting. So I know that the audience of CMI are not the class B or class C, but the class A. And you can always invest in good company practices that will allow you to get the best out of your people.
Uh,
As
the the ones
yes.
the ones
Go ahead.
described by Dr. Mighty, actually, that's the duties and functions of the designated safety officer, which is a requirement of the Joint Memorandum Circular. So you need to have a designated safety officer. We would even recommend having an emergency response framework in place and then having a way to screen and do have a triaging, effective triage at the entry point of the company so that at that level, you're already able to screen people who are not supposed to enter the company because they have symptoms or have been identified as close contacts in their community. And then what we also recommended is that we link absenteeism, like if they do not report for work, the HR should call them why they're not reporting for work because for all we know, they might already have been identified as a close contact because of somebody in their household or in their barangay has been identified as a close contact. So it would mean that the workplace where that employee is currently working on may have been potentially seeded with the virus. So it would trigger now a lot of activities in terms of disinfection and IPC in the workplace in terms of sanitation and disinfection. So all of that is the within the purview of the designated safety officer. And most of all, having a business continuity plan is also very important because you need to be able to identify what are the triggers for you to activate your business continuity plan, because in the workplace, it is very important to ensure that your productivity will not suffer, because it will result to the, to damage your brand integrity if you're not able to deliver on your in your production and things like that. So it's very important to do that for corporate public health.
Thank you, Dr. Eileen. I would love to go on, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank all our speakers, Dr. Eileen Espina, Dr. Michael T., and Dr. Benjamin Ko. And thank you, everybody, for attending this webinar. If you want to reach out to any of the three webinar speakers, you'll find CMI's contact details on the screen right now. CMI is open Mondays to Saturdays, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and visit the website at www.cmi.care or the Facebook page at facebook.com/cmi.care for the latest updates. Thank you, everybody, and stay safe.